Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, May 15th. Let's hop in here and see what we've got. Now, over the weekend, I was working on moving data over from my hard drive to my external hard drive, or more accurately, I had an external hard drive that was formatted in what is file allocation table 64-bit or FAT64, more commonly known by Microsoft, who owns the license, as exFAT, EXFAT. My new Asus router did not pay the license to mount properly exFAT, and so it would have just been a lot more work to figure out how to get that to mount than it would be just to format it into the ext4 file format, which is one of the file format options of Linux, since the router is Linux. So, while it is easier, it's more time consuming because I then moved everything over into a zip file on my computer's big hard drive of about 200 gigabytes after deleting about 200 gigabytes of probably useless redundant backup stuff. So I moved about 200 gigabytes on a USB 3 from a USB 3 hard drive, which took about a day, and after failing once, so it probably took about 12 hours. And now I'm moving the contents of the zip file back to the newly formatted USB 3 external hard drive. The reason I put it in a zip file, and I didn't use a lot of compression and all, I used the fastest compression method, and honestly I probably should have used... Interesting. So you just don't have an opportunity anymore. They've changed how this works. Any multiple of 10 is just how many it's going to open. And so I can't say just give me 10 legacy packs. So clearly Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel realized that a lot of people were sitting on a lot of master packs. So it wasn't my fault at all that I opened the 100 packs before. So I'm going to have to constantly try to keep this under 9. Or, I guess, under 8. Yeah. I guess that's how that's going to go, is that we're just going to constantly open single individual packs, or try to center around 10. I guess you could be not 9 or 8, but you could be 19. Just keep it under 19 at all times. Yeah. So yeah, right now my computer is moving files over. Oh, the reason why I put it in a zip file is because there might have been some kind of file special permissions or properties in the files, and putting in a zip file feels to me like it might have a chance of keeping those special permissions and properties. Although in all honesty, that would almost certainly be the opposite direction, where if I was taking a Linux file, I would want to put it in a zip file on a Windows NTFS hard drive and then restore it. But yeah, and that's about the best I know you can do, because if you were to just try and copy the image and then restore the image, you would undo the file formatting. Well, you could certainly do it all on Linux and have another hard drive that was formatted in ext4 file format, and then use rsync to just remotely sync the files over. That's how you would do it in Linux, and that's a little bit better. Alright, so we got a couple more new cards. for whatever that's really worth. We still don't have this world event happening. Weirdly. Like, there's qualifiers here. But when does this start? WCS would start today, and yet I'm just not seeing it. Today's May 15th. This says it would first stage would start May 15th at 10 o'clock. It's not 10 o'clock yet, but man, you would definitely expect that there would either be something. Let's not watch that. So yeah, that created a weird situation. Let's see, how do we exit this? End replay. It really jumps in there without giving you any warning. Yeah, there's just nothing there, so I don't know, maybe I didn't qualify, or maybe it's just gonna pop up without any forewarning, which would be weird, because every other event has popped up with forewarning. Like, I'm looking, I'm fairly certain that they're implying that these events are going to actually happen in the digital card game interface, and it isn't just a challenge in a real world event somewhere. Maybe I failed the proficiency test and they didn't let me in because of that. I doubt that, though, because I don't think that proficiency test website would have had my login credentials. So yeah, over the whole weekend I've been in this weird situation where I really couldn't do too much with my computers. Arguably I shouldn't be streaming at this time. Hopefully extracting zip files at the same time as streaming won't be too big of a deal. But the worst case scenario certainly would be that it messes up the extraction, or locks up the computer, or reboots the computer. Things like that would be pretty devastating. Meanwhile, I've managed to switch everything over, or pretty much everything over, to my new router. That being said, I still have some work on it. I'll see if I really want to work on it during the week, or if I want to just leave it as is. Just leave it as is until Friday again. I still haven't figured out how to move the files over to get WireGuard to work, but the AdGuard home blocking seems to be working, and there's really maybe a little bit more I'd like to be able to do there to be double certain about that, but there's actually a fairly limited number of places where you can check if you're having a DNS leak. There's like one website that does a DNS leak test, and then there's about 3 or 4 places that will double check if DNS secure, is enabled. And theoretically, if you have set up AdGuard Home to only use DNS crypt servers, or one DNS crypt server, which arguably you'd want more than one, you have to just assume that that's working too. In this whole process, I've in two parallel processes, I guess, of my TV breaking and thus me removing an older TV on the wall, that's just pushed me further to actually taking some action on an old TV table that was under the TV, and I want to actually get rid of that. It's a glass table it's just some sheets of glasses, so there is a decent amount of reasons to get rid of it. Oh man, I should have gone crazier with that, I guess. I could have activated his ability. So yeah, I'm thinking I'm gonna try and get rid of this glass table. In the glass TV table was 2 surround sound amps, and I can get rid of at least one of those. Like, in this whole process, it really just brings to the forefront the fact that it's probably been about 10 years since I've used my surround sound or that TV, and I'm just not watching movies the way I once would have, and I'm just not likely to watch movies in the future that much. It's a little bit harder of a justification to get rid of the speakers, though. Like, the speakers I have are perfectly fine. The only slight complaint you might have is that they don't have upfiring Atmos to go to like a 9.1.4 setup or 7.1.4 setup, and even if I was going to get speakers to try and match that, I would still need a new surround sound amp. There is slight reasons to have a new surround sound amp, particularly I guess if it's going with the new HDMI 2.1. I think it's 2.1 standard. Like, if there's real good support for a new HDMI, which arguably you might want to wait till like an HDMI 2.5 or 3.0, because I don't think the new standard is standard enough on HDMI. I know my Pioneer surround sound amp had some streaming services built into it, and maybe there's some point that that kind of software would stop working with the built-in options. But yeah, debating getting rid of a lot of my Blu-rays, not just some of the ones that are less likely to needed to be watched. Yeah, if you ever need to boil down your movie collection, well, it's probably pretty easy for most people, because all you have to think is, unless you're strictly sticking to movies and you're not streaming anything, a big collection of movies that most people have are going to be streamable, and the vast majority of movies and TV series aren't going to have any extras that you actually want to watch. Um, but yeah, it's pretty easy to realize which ones, though, are still not available. And there is still, I would say, a collection percentage. 20% perhaps of what I have is still not something you'd easily be able to stream, or that have some extra features. Now, arguably, if you have a really, really good TV and you have a good, like, 4K upscaling um, device, you might see better quality compared to streaming. That's definitely a possibility. Guess we'll just go this right this time. I guess I will just be in a general weird position, though. I guess I could play some more Pokemon Snap, since I've got nothing else to do while the files are moving over. I wouldn't want to record, even though that's exactly what I'm doing right now. Of course, this is yet another example of me getting distracted away from DC supervillains. If I even destroy this, we'll experiment with that, but almost certainly it won't work. Yeah, and I guess over the weekend, there isn't much else I can talk about or say. With my new router, I so far over the weekend haven't had any problems with the network just collapsing and falling down and dropping every 30 minutes, so I was able to watch several streaming shows and movies, and none of them had buffering issues or anything like that. So I am a little trepidatious as far as to whether I even want to turn on the quality of service option on my new router, because honestly I think it might be doing something itself already that's good enough, and I just don't want to really turn on any new feature ever if I can avoid it, because who knows, any new feature turned on could be the one feature that causes trouble. They updated the programming just on my Tuya smart bulb, so I had to go back and rechange the programming as to how it worked, which is a little weird, but I figured it out. And as far as all my smart stuff, it seems like it's connecting alright. Not amazingly better, though, than what it was doing before. In particular, sorry, I'm chewing ice. There's like one light bulb I have that's just in the furthest corner of the house, and that one in particular still seems to not get the signal always. And I'm hoping that I just need to unplug and replug in my smart Christmas lights, otherwise my smart Christmas lights at some point have broken. But yeah, I really don't have a lot to talk about there as far as video game news, or as even accountability section stuff, so we probably should just move on to the video game news relatively quickly today. So, yeah. Add that to the hand, sorry. Don't want to get distracted here. So we have Larry Erb here saying, boy, it was fun to work on the Zune. So I guess he worked on that project. Which is weird. Certainly. That he's waxing nostalgic on an old project. But that's not really why I had him on the open up. The reason I wanted to point out is this tweet from the 13th that he says he was troubleshooting his Nintendo Switch with because it will turn on his LG OLED TV via the HDMI-C, which is, it means when you press the on button on a Switch in this case, it would send a signal to turn the TV on, but it won't turn it off. Whereas, and then he throws some shade here saying the Xbox Series can turn it on and off, so there's that. So he's throwing a little shade there. Which, to some level of fairness, I've seen it implemented as far as HDMI-C, where you can pick a couple different options as to whether you want the on and off to work. There's not as much of a standard, where there probably should be a standard that says it should just support everything. Summon this. Activate this. Toss this. It is also, I think, very reasonable to point out, though, that HDMI-C as a technology is far too simplistic, and really there should be a version 2.0 that allows more of the buttons, if not all of the buttons, to be supported and sent through. Also, more data in general to be sent through. A text or see, let's hope we can activate this. Like a text or audio version of commands being sent through would make a lot of sense, because if you have a smart voice remote, being able to talk into one remote and send it to the other TV would be potentially useful. Is this enough to do a one-turn victory? think it is. I guess at the moment we are just trying to move up the rank, which is fine by me. Well, some people may say that it's somewhat prescient that I talked about previously how it was weird that this United States-based company Molasses Flood was working on the Witcher spin-off. I thought it was a reboot. Project Sirius? Maybe there's a spin-off and a reboot, both being worked on. In all honesty, it's simply, I think, more of a case that I have very little faith in humanity, and particularly just corporate xenophobia not being what it is. So it comes as very little surprise to me now that CD Projekt Red has laid off the Molasses Flood developers after changes to the Witcher spinoff. Over 24 developers were let go from the Molasses Flood shortly after it gave the Witcher game an internal reboot. Looking at the screenshot too, they really are going for kind of a weird fashion thing here, in that Ciri has this bow tying her shirt here, and then just nothing holding the shirt closed in the middle, and then a belt over it. You'd think in most cases there would be another ribbon if you have that technology. So the Kotaku is saying that 29 out of 43 developers were cut, so nearly half of the studio seems to be, well, over half of the studio seems to have been laid off. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is the beginning of the end for potentially the Molasses Flood, which I think is a wholly owned subsidiary by CDPR. Yeah. Molasses Flood was acquired by CDPR back in 2021. To date, Sirius would be the studio's third game after The Flame and the Flood and Drake Hollow, which I'm not going to waste time Googling these two games, but I'm fairly certain neither one of these games were quite to the level of quality, or anywhere close to the level of quality that The Witcher 3 is. And I guess it is also worth pointing out that this was going to be a multiplayer game for the Witcher series, which might make a lot of sense, that if they were making a multiplayer and they said let's not make a multiplayer game and instead let's make a single player game, that you would get rid of a bunch of people potentially with multiplayer technology, but that doesn't really make that much sense. We've heard stories like this certainly before from CDPR too, is that their management is not particularly good, that they are just the Square Enix of Europe, as it were, and it creates very little faith that we ever will get a good or a finished game out of anything that CD Projekt Red touches ever again, and that it was just a fluke that there was success around The Witcher 3. In a lot of ways, though, you look at an example like ZeniMax, and Skyrim kind of was decades ago, and it feels very much like a fluke. You couldn't say that they've consistently, at ZeniMax, made consistently great games. And then you have like Project New Vegas, which is a completely different company as far as Fallout, as being the favorite Fallout game compared to like Fallout 76, which in a lot of ways I imagine that's what this project also was trying to be, was to be something closer to a Fallout 76 than a Fallout New Vegas. Okay. It's a little surprising, but I guess not that surprising, that there isn't more like protectionism as far as employment for subsidiaries of foreign-owned companies, particularly in the United States, because it would be a hard argument to make to say, well, we won't let these foreign companies fire and lay off people in the United States as easily as we'll let the United States-based companies fire and lay off people, because then any attractiveness of having a company in the United States would potentially go down as far as foreign investment. Although maybe governments shouldn't actively cater to or try to get foreign investment in general in their country. At a certain point, the United States also could solely focus on having people invest in their currency, in their bonds of the US government, instead of investing in having businesses and companies owned by foreign entities. And that would be very much similar to China's own policy, which you have to at least partner with a Chinese company to do business in China. At least video game companies do. Moving on, other big news we have is that the CMA has decried the EU's Microsoft Activision approval and stands by its rejection. So, two stories here in one. The EU has put out approval, as was expected, which definitely puts it at odds with the UK-based CMA, which it's interesting that they made any statement that could turn into a headline of decrying EU's approval. Subheadline here is the CMA thinks the regulator made the wrong call giving its Microsoft permission to merge with Activision Blizzard and reassessed its decision to block it. And they did this in the Twitter. Someone responded to like a Twitter tweet I did in 2018. So like 5-year-old tweet, which that's a weird twist of event, particularly on Twitter, where the general idea was that these would be short and of their time messages, not long forum posts that people could return to years later. I don't even know how you would have found a tweet from 2018. And it didn't just look like spam or a bot or anything like that, so it looked like a real person was commenting. there is a lot of value in potentially having something more like a forum, then I think there is a value in let's see. Yeah, let's go ahead and link summon. Even though we don't have anything to destroy at the moment. Yeah, I definitely feel like there's more value in long-term forums that you can return to. That being said, a lot of long-term forums are dying because they're filling up with spam. And apparently somebody is trying to sue the Internet Archive and Wayback Machine. Which that too. I think I can just win here, so let's activate this effect. That too is in danger of going away. There was also a study I saw that said that 42% of all internet traffic last month was bots, which some of those might be web scraping bots, but I think a significant amount of internet traffic probably is just bots trying to do nefarious things. And I don't know what we could do to fix that other than creating perhaps a new HTTPS type standard that has built-in CAPTCHA systems, which would be to say that it would be built from the ground up to say, hey, you've got to prove that you're a human before you can send any traffic at all. And I don't know how you could 100% prove that without somebody working a way around that. But you could try, certainly. It would probably need to be something like having a challenge phrase and a response phrase. One of the problems I think you run into, though, is when you use just a phrase like bots, that really is just automation. And even my own macro is technically automated, so technically you could call it a bot if you wanted to. And if you created an extremely tight rule of regulations that would stop my macro from working, that would make me less efficient in the long run. Which, me saying I'm efficient is kind of an oxymoron in the first place. There are some efficiencies that I have developed, but overall they can only act as a multiplier of my own energy that I put in when trying to stream, so I still have to have the energy to stream in the first place. And arguably they're not really a multiplier as much as they are just a addition. Because they're only useful, my macro's only useful when, at the very beginning during the setup, I don't have any automations going as I'm actually interacting. with perhaps the exception of like the middle mouse click button closing a web page, which is just an extension. I guess that does get into the whole chat GPT nonsense and AI that people are talking about a ton, though, is that it would be certainly a strange future if I could talk to some AI and say, hey, play this game for me and create critical reviews in my style. And I'm just not playing the game at that point, or I'm just not talking at that point. There is, before we even throw technology into it though, there is precedent for that. Game Grumps effectively is one person playing a video game with one person just watching and adding commentary. So the one person just watching and adding commentary, I could see trying to do something like that, and then having an AI play the video game so you could just comment on what's actually going on in the game. You could potentially do that anyways. By just downloading other people's gameplay, but by having an AI do it, then you own the footage completely, the video footage. Although legally you may not own the footage. Nobody may own the footage if you have an AI playing the video game. The commentator, the commentary part would be a little bit weirder. So is he going for a one-turn kill? Other big news, Amazon Games and Embracer have teamed on the Lord of the Rings MMO, which this is once again yet another attempt to do something with Lord of the Rings. Although interestingly here, this is a license that seems to not include Warner Brothers at all, instead dealing with Amazon Games, which has really failed to make anything of interest so far, and Embracer Group, which has acquired a lot of people to become the new THQ, THQ Reborn, but it also has kind of failed to really make a lot of great games, like, or even make a large amount of games for as long as it's existed. This feels like this is definitely an increasing coziness in which either Embracer Group is going to try to be acquired by Amazon Games, or Amazon Games is going to try to be acquired by Embracer Group, which I could see it going either way, where Amazon of Amazon.com just decides to get out of the game business and sell the subsidiary, because it was also Embracer that bought Square Enix and then sold they didn't buy Square Enix, they bought the Tomb Raider company and the rights to Tomb Raider, and the Hitman company and the rights to Hitman, and then they sold the Tomb Raider rights to Amazon Prime Video for more than what they spent, I think, to buy those two companies. So they just kind of immediately made a ton of money, and honestly the whole deal sounds a little fishy, as like there's some collusion going on here. But yeah, I guess, mark my word, I would be very shocked if we don't see at least a lot more deals between Embracer and Amazon of some kind. Now, I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan. Arguably, I'm not a Lord of the Rings fan at all. probably haven't sat through all the movies. I played Lego Lord of the Rings and Lego The Hobbit, which are some of the lesser Lego games. The Shadow of Mordor game I enjoyed, but that's inherently just a non-canon side story. I think most people would describe it as. But there is something in this thumbnail that confuses me, because notoriously the Lord of the Rings story has been this men-only, male-only journey that, yeah, in modern days people would definitely throw out the theory that Tolkien was a latent homosexual because every single character is male, but maybe he would even be just accused as being a sexist by not having any female characters. So, who is this character? Is this supposed to be the wife of this guy? Maybe. But, yeah. This guy in particular, I'm not even really that familiar with. And he's big and prominent. Whereas Gandalf the White, or Sauron the White, maybe that's his name. But I know Gollum. I know Frodo, Sam. Like, I know these characters. Probably I'm not naming them correctly. I know the dragon. And then I have this general feeling that there was a human character that they gave some storylines to in the movies, which they're going to remake the movies again, which is kind of crazy. But honestly, I think even in the movies, the human character was probably overplayed, and he was just not that big in the books. But I could not for the life of me tell you who this person is. Of course, the bigger question, certainly, as far as a video game, would be, how is an MMO going to work around Lord of the Rings? Because you have this very specific issue in that for hundreds, if not thousands of years, the only real focus was the Sauron bad guy, creating the Rings of Power, creating the One Ring, being defeated, then coming back, and then or trying to come back. So when you get to a point of an MMO where you're going to have new and fresh story content over and over again, I feel like you're kind of painted into this corner with the Lord of the Rings universe, in that it's all going to want to center around the rings one way or the other. Best case scenario is you've got to make an MMO that takes place after the events of the Lord of the Rings canon, which is to say any stories or notes written as far as a sequel. It would have to take place past that point. It'd have to take place past the point where the rings exist at all. You could try to set it straight far in the past, but there's, I think, too high of a danger of being tempted to go and move the timeline forward towards the point of the rings. And if that's how you have to do it, then at a certain point you really are just going to be making a World of Warcraft clone, which might be good enough, frankly. Like, I think you might do decent enough to have a World of Warcraft clone just set in the Tolkien universe, where there are the different races of things, of characters, and there's a general understanding of that high fantasy world. I assume Lord of the Rings would be a high fantasy world. Yep. I was in a Walmart, mostly window shopping for TVs, and I noticed that the Dungeons and Dragons like Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, and Dungeon Master Handbook are each selling for $30. So yes, you'd be $100 in to a setup. Now that doesn't include any stories, so you probably would be about $120 in. Plus, you would need some dice, and probably a Dungeon Master shield. I don't know how much you really need otherwise, though, to play Dungeons and Dragons. And you could download scenarios online for free, almost certainly. So the scenario books maybe are not necessary, but that does seem relatively cheap, although not that cheap. Like, you really have to go into it assuming that you're going to be able to get a group of people to play with you for a long amount of time to reduce the price per entertainment hour there. Because if you bought $120 worth of books and some dice and a Dungeon Master shield and you played just once, well, you're very dangerously close to buying a Nintendo Switch and potentially one game even. Switch in one game would be a little bit more expensive than that, but not by much. Although even in that comparison, most Switch games and Nintendo games I've noticed are fairly short. Like, they are not the long epic grindy games that I sometimes play on PC. But yeah, I thought the books were a lot more expensive, and maybe they're just cheap Walmart versions of the books. There's also a lot of manga, a very, very small book section in general in Walmart, which is not surprising, but every single manga book had its spine pulled back, so it's fairly obvious that there's kids at some point that are spending a lot of time just reading the manga off the shelves. Noticeably, no comic books. I should have destroyed that one. Let's go ahead and activate this. And then I guess discard this. Destroy this. And destroy this. I'm just trying everything. Just wait and see how this resolves. Although, I guess it is also worth pointing out here, since I am just rambling, even though the Dungeons and Dragons books are cheap, they are arguably not what I would recommend in favor of Pathfinder. Pathfinder might be a little bit more expensive, but I think over the long term you're going to see a lot of Dungeons and Dragons people move over to Pathfinder. And unfortunately, I looked up to see if Pathfinder as a potential competitor to Dungeons and Dragons has any like kid-friendly starter scenarios and things like that. And no, they really don't. Whereas Dungeons and Dragons does have a thing called Dungeons and Dragons that is more kid-friendly, but it is definitely its own separate middle step. It's like nothing I'm trying to do here is working. So I'm getting annoying at this point. Okay. I guess I did watch several YouTube things as I was testing YouTube. I watched that new animated show called Mulligan on Netflix, which, if anything, I guess I just, since that's almost a brand new show, that may have encouraged them to make more episodes of Mulligan, which arguably is not the message I want to see. There's nothing super wrong with Mulligan, but it just doesn't have that interesting of a idea behind it. Particularly when you think about how the deep state comedy animated show got canceled, which I think that was a much more wide and funny potential show with perhaps more heart to it overall. Whereas Mulligan is really the idea that aliens attacked and then a Joe Schmo type character becomes the president and they're starting over the United States and they're trying to make a new country without just repeating the mistakes of the past as far as governance and government in general. And so that makes the whole series really just be a political story. So yeah, it really is just a political comedy with perhaps some hints at a Fry and Leela romance that will probably not pay off for a very long time. Yeah. I definitely feel like there's a difference when you look at something that's narrowly focused like Mulligan and something like Futurama, where the general concept is just that this guy gets frozen, gets sent to the future, and in the future any kind of crazy sci-fi futuristic thing can happen. But it definitely doesn't feel like that's the way Mulligan could play out. It's limited within its own rules. And some of their jokes, I think, in Mulligan kind of fall flat in that the scientist lady who basically gets sidelined for the most part at the back half of the series, first season. She starts off as having these like two young kids that are always needing childcare and distracting her. And those kids, probably in some throwaway joke that I just didn't hear, disappear from the show completely. Yep. So, yeah, because there's just like not any room for kid comedy, and pretty much right about the same time that the young kids disappear, you start to see teenagers appear for teenage comedy, and even those jokes mostly fall flat. I also finished the Junji Ito Netflix series, which I have to say it's really just awful. Like, I think very possibly the Junji Ito stories, if they are like the animated Netflix series, would work fine in manga form, having kind of abrupt endings there, but it kind of needs a coda of some sort, where a narrator comes on, a Rod Serling type Twilight Zone presenter type character, wraps everything up, and in exact reference to that, if you were to take out the wrap-ups of a lot of the episodes in the Twilight Zone by Rod Serling, then the episodes would just kind of abruptly end as soon as something bad is revealed to have happened to the protagonist. In the first few Twilight Zone episodes, since I started to watch those off Blu-ray discs, actually have that exact issue where on their own they don't have a wrap-up story at the end, and so the stories do somewhat abruptly end, although the first couple episodes adjust for that by usually having somebody monologue at the end of the episode, where they eventually just turn that into Rod Serling himself monologuing. I don't know if I've done this correctly. I know I watched several other things, but I honestly, for the life of me, couldn't tell you what I watched. Started several movies and then got bored very quickly and muted them. But I was able to sit through a 2-hour movie without any network problems, so that was all I was really testing. Okay, let's see. Swap that. Now for that. Apparently, have to wait to be able to activate that. Get rid of that. Attach this. It's gonna take my card. Oh darn. Moving on with big news. This should probably be the last game we play today too, because, well, actually, I guess I am in this weird situation where we should just go long today. There is a real reason to go long today, since I can't really do anything else. So, and that would help me go up in rank. Okay. Go ahead and banish 2 cards here. Summon this here. Activate this here. I should have activated this ability actually first, but whatever. Activate this here. Special summon. Then this one by link summoning this one, and then taking this, and then taking this. Probably didn't need to activate this one, but we'll go ahead and do it anyways. They'll give us a free shuffle. Actually, by activating that, I just protected this. which is great because he didn't chain fast enough. Well, that worked very nicely. It's going in. Oops. Ah, darn it. Should have summoned Zeus. Didn't summon Zeus. Next big news from Gamatsu. Atari, the company that acquired the rights in the name of Atari, has acquired the System Shock remake developer Night Dive for up to $19.5 million, which I think it's fair to point out that that was already announced. So I don't know if this is just perhaps confirmation of what we had already known. I'm fairly certain this was already announced. It personally, for me, doesn't feel like this increases the odds of the System Shock remake from being better or coming out quicker or anything like that. Like, I think the odds are mediocre, almost right in the middle, that we will get a System Shock remake, and the odds are medium. I'm very neutral on it that it would be good. So yeah. So yeah, I am still very neutral on it. If anything, it slightly decreases my hope in it, just because I don't think Atari has successfully, this new Atari has successfully done anything. Speaking of successfully doing things, or not successfully doing things, a Video Game Chronicle article here says that the Battle Royale Vampire the Masquerade Blood Hunt is ending development, but the game server will remain online. Which, in fairness, there are so many Vampire the Masquerade games out there, as that is just a generic title for a system to cosplay or pretend you're a vampire. There's just so much around that idea, that so many games, that it's just a muddled mess in my brain as far as which game is which, and none of them are particularly good, which that is yet another issue that must be mentioned. So we summon this one, activate this. Summon this one, activate this. Do this. Do this. And attack. So we're just hoping that we can win here. I think what I want to do, since we're in this weird position, is let's end this victory here. Let's go through all the news and just see how I feel about it. after that point. We may just come back at the very end of the stream and play some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Odds are low that that would really happen. I probably will just be tired at that point. Because, yeah, I am feeling a little sleepy. Already. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that works good. Let's get the news done first and prioritize that. And then if there's extra time, I'm making a promise when I really shouldn't, but if there's extra time, we'd come back here. Looks like I'm about to level up again on the useless player rank. That means nothing, and I would need 2 more victories to get to gold tier 1. We definitely want to get to platinum 5. That being said, we're at the halfway point of the month, so unless I just have nothing else to do for the rest of the month, it would be a struggle to get all the way up to platinum 1 and diamond 5, which is really where we want it to go. Like, we want to be at platinum 5 at least, but ideally I would want to be at diamond 5 by the end of the month. Just barely making it to diamond 5 is likely what would happen if we even get that far, and then we would fall down to platinum 5, and then the next month we could work towards getting to diamond 5. And I wouldn't be surprised if this diamond tier is actually just a no-go zone in general after diamond 5, because there's just too strong of players. The other story we already had talked about, as far as the European Commission clearing Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard. So, yeah. There's nothing super big to say there, other than, yes, if it really came down to a system where if it really came down to a thing where Microsoft just said, fine, we just will not do business in the UK, I think the UK would probably say, well, then all of Microsoft can't do business in the UK. And then the UK would probably kowtow and go, wait a minute, we can't have PCs that can't have Windows installed in the UK. But if there was some smaller separation where it said that the Activision Blizzard or just the Xbox division of Microsoft could no longer do business in the UK because they went ahead and did the merger, even though the UK said no to it, which I definitely feel like they could do that, assuming the US approves it. Now, at a certain point, if the US doesn't approve it, because Microsoft is based in Redmond, Washington, and Activision Blizzard is based in California of someplace, because those are United States locations, that the US really could say no to it, I think a lot better. It would be a lot more work nonetheless to create a shell company or move out of the United States and expatriate companies. It's practically impossible, I imagine, to actually expatriate a company and say, well, actually, we're going to be a company based out of the Swedish Alps or something like that instead. But yeah, that is inherently the threat, and we'll probably never get anywhere close to them implementing the threats. But the UK and the US are the last two big linchpins, and if they fall, any other country saying no to the merger would probably not really matter. Alright, Video Games Chronicles articles. The Zelda OLED boosted the UK Switch sales in April, but the PlayStation 5 is still the top selling console. This would be the Zelda skinned OLED version of the Switch, which it is also worth mentioning that upon further review, the D brand skin does seem to be completely out of the clear as far as being sued by Nintendo for copyright infringement, because the symbol that the D brand had that is copying the general layout of the symbols for the official Zelda OLED model, which I wish I had a screenshot of that to show instead of just this commercial video. Even though the placements are similar, the logo is actually an Illuminati type symbol, so there's just like no lettering, no fonts, no symbols in the D brand version that I think Nintendo would win on. Nintendo could definitely try to sue them, but there was a similar Lego copyright infringement lawsuit that went the way of Lego, where Lego several years ago made a set based on the Fab Five, the gay guys that remodel and make over straight guys. And one of the Fab Fives, one of the newer Fab Five guys, wears this jacket. Well, the artist that made the jacket tried to sue Lego because they made a minifig of the character wearing the jacket, but Lego won because while there were similarities, the actual symbols and icons on the jacket were unique. So it wasn't a direct copy of the patches and the art on the original jacket. They made new ones, and thus it was not his copyrighted work. And that's exactly the same thing D-Brand has done. So general placement does not work as a copyright. Like, I guess you could make an example here. Nintendo, as a trademark, probably owns Nintendo in a circle with a registered trademark symbol here, both in white and in red, although both of these trademarks and logos are not used that much these days. It's still probably used a ton though. But Nintendo would not be able to say someone is violating their copyright or trademark if you had, say, a circle and the word Sega in white or red with a registered trademark. They don't own the position of an oval with text in the middle with a registered trademark at the end, which arguably I don't think anybody could claim they own the placement of a registered trademark. There's nothing creative in any of that. Even if Nintendo made a fairly complicated collage of pictures being bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller, and there was just an entire, like, almost mathematical fractal pattern, that probably wouldn't be creative enough to own a copyright or sue somebody if they copied it. And immediately we have a crash tab. I am noticing that Firefox crashes its tabs a lot more. That being said, it seems to be rock solid about restoring tabs, which is weird. I think we've been all over this story before. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom game says the game has traditional dungeons. That seems to be very much the case. Everybody seems to be loving it, except for a small people. But I think are making a legitimate argument when they call Zelda Tears of the Kingdom $70 DLC. Because effectively that is what it is. Like, it is $70 to have DLC addition to Breath of the Wild, when arguably the traditional dungeons should have been in Breath of the Wild in the first place. The one problem with that, though, is going to come down to just the gameplay per dollar comparison. Uh, it's not super crazy to call it DLC if it was only 10, maybe 20 hours on average of gameplay. But I imagine Tears of the Kingdom is really getting into the 50, 60 hour mark. So then it would become less reasonable to assume that if you had merged Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild together and sold it for $60, that should be a single game. So yeah, if Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom combined are like 120 hours, that would be insane. If Tears of the Kingdom really is only 10 or 20 hours, though, that's also going to be insane. Although, in all fairness, if that was really the problems, then people would have complained about it by now. Like, undoubtedly, people have played all the way through Tears of the Kingdom. And so I'm not seeing or hearing anybody complain about the length of the game. And it's generally very unfair to say, well, this technology or the level design or the gameplay mechanics of a sequel should have been in the original game. It is a general feeling that I understand amongst gamers, but it's generally not fair. And almost certainly that is part of the embracing of the idea of remaking or rebooting series, is that gameplay mechanics from later games in the series would have worked better and improved the first game, which uniquely makes video games more susceptible to being remade compared to movies, where movies can't really add any new mechanics. Really, you're going to see audio and visual on the screen. Maybe you can add better filming technology and better CGI, and that's about it. Which, yeah, that definitely makes a good argument against remaking the Lord of the Rings series in particular, because a remake of the Lord of the Rings series is pretty much not going to do anything different. Like, they probably should just make a new fantasy series at that point. Really, there should be more high fantasy type movies that come out, at least one every couple of years. We really don't need to talk about the EU regulators reportedly clearing Microsoft Activision acquisition, since we now know they have cleared it. A lot of this is older stories getting in the mix, I guess. Nintendo hints its console could be closer to launch than the Switch was. Which that's an article we already talked about. May PlayStation Plus game catalog and classic titles being announced. I think we've covered that. Mortal Kombat teasers into the reboot. Modern Warfare Warzone Reloaded patch list. These are all old stories. I thought I had gotten through all the old stories, but apparently not. Old story. Xbox May system update. Old story. Old story. Old story. Yeah. Just close all of these. This is all just old stuff. Yeah, this is just all old stuff. Summer's Game Fest. AI using Guitar Hero. Peacemaker and Homelander might be Mortal Kombat 1 DLC characters. And I got a ton of tabs here too. No plans to cut the Switch prices. Oh, I did see a review on this ROG Ally. You get like 2, maybe 3 hours of playtime on its batteries. It's really just a um, situation where these portable Windows devices could never possibly last as well as a Linux device because Windows has never really been optimized in any way for battery, and honestly it's not really that optimized in general as far as the spaghetti code that is Windows. um, so yeah, I said it last time but I'll say it again. Whatever was going to be the first Steam Deck competitor was probably secretly in development before the Steam Deck was announced, and so it was going to inevitably be a flop compared to the Steam Deck, and that's very much what the Asus ROG Ally, which notably here, I just got an Asus router, but that is hardly going to make me an Asus fanboy. I imagine Asus probably has several different factories and several different development teams, and some of their devices are decent and good, and some of their devices are probably terrible. So yeah, I could not really recommend this at all. Yes, perhaps if you had it docked all the time, then you could have still probably an overpriced and underpowered Windows 11 PC. Kind of gaming PC, but kind of not. Yeah, I do enjoy that the buttons are in a more traditional layout, and I think that probably would be helpful if the Steam Deck decided and opted to make a more traditional button layout version and sell that, because I definitely would be more interested in that if they could squeeze the touchpads somewhere else, or just eliminate the touchpads and give me a standard Xbox layout. I'd prefer that. That being said, I've always thought that the best idea might be to have kind of a low profile, almost nub in the middle with a touchpad around it, or have a touchpad that is somehow just hypersensitive on the top of analog sticks. Either one of those, I think, might be a way to get back to a more traditional layout. Or maybe you just don't need touchpads at all. Maybe you don't need analog sticks at all. Like I basically would have to wait till a Steam Deck was in my hands to figure it out. Here you can see Steam Deck did say congratulations to Asus ROG for releasing it, and they responded with a thank you on a tweet. So they're two corporate brands talking to each other. We have a Yumi not Usagi on the chat saying, or no, it's Yumi no Usagi saying hello. So Yumi the bunny, if I am translating that correctly from Japanese. I'll say hello back, Yumi. Hello. Speedrunner has already beaten Zelda Tears of the Kingdom in 94 minutes, which that doesn't really mean anything other than to say, even in speedrunning, they have yet to find tricks to significantly reduce the playtime. So we know at minimum it takes at least 94 minutes to beat Tears of the Kingdom, and I imagine for your average player it takes much longer than that. Let's see. Lords of the Fallen could be released in October, A reliable leaker has hinted at a late 2023 release for this game. Lords of the Fallen, I assume not connected to the Lords of the Ring universe, although it would be a nice sequel name, frankly, for the Lord of the Rings. Layers of Fear demo will be released next week. Amnesia the Bunker has been delayed to June. Wow. What's funny is there's this weird mix of old and new stories out of order, and most of these are old stories from Friday, at least. Hogwarts Legacy was delayed to November for the Switch version. Yep. Here's that D-brand I was talking about. Yeah. So this symbol here was what I was concerned about that might get D-brand sued. And this turns out, when I saw someone look at it and show it more zoomed in, to be more of an Illuminati symbol, which clears them on that. Nintendo wouldn't be able to claim the patterns on the sides here. And this is like Nordic writing, so nobody owns a copyright to that, and I assume the same is true for this image here, that is not something Nintendo owns. So there's basically nothing that... I wish they had a side-by-side comparison with the Nintendo version versus the D-brand skin one. Yep. But yeah, if you just wanted the skin, getting it from D-brand or getting a similar skin from D-brand is going to be significantly cheaper than buying a new OLED version. And inherently, it needs to be pointed out the insanity around buying a new Switch that is custom skinned. But having these limited edition versions of Switches. But I could certainly see, if you needed to buy a new Switch, that you could potentially make an argument for getting the custom skins if the custom skins weren't that much more expensive than the original version. I do think they are way more expensive, though. Yeah. $360. For the Nintendo OLED Switch version versus spending probably... I don't know if the OLED Switch version... I guess that's the question to ask here. Can I Google what is the price of a Switch OLED? Let me turn the blur on for a second, and we'll just do a bit of shopping here. So directly from Nintendo, you have $350 as the MSRP. So it's $10 more expensive to get the Zelda version versus the black and white version, which feels like that was supposed to be a Metroid Dread version, if anything. Noticeably, with the different colors, schemes, or skins, you are branding your Switch a little bit differently. Whereas they started off very much trying to have everybody have a blue and red Joy-Con, which I don't think anybody liked. I don't know if we ever found out who was making the OLED screen. I guess that's an interesting thought too. Let's see. Let me see if I can just type this. Who manufactures Switch screens? This is a bit of a waste of time, I will admit. But apparently, the Universal Display Corporation company mentioned the console in the final reports. So it's not a name of a company I even recognize making these OLEDs screens. And I wouldn't be surprised if the non-OLED versions of screens are literally made by multiple manufacturers. Because there really is no reason that you wouldn't inherently have multiple manufacturers. Wouldn't be surprised if there's actually multiple manufacturers of the Switch OLED version. But if they are actually going with Sharp in the future, then that probably does imply that they are going to be focused on a slightly more consistent, better quality screen. And it probably means a higher resolution too. That they're going to try and squeeze 1080p in a 7 to 10 inch screen. It would be crazy if the screen folded for the price of that, but I don't think Sharp makes folding screens. Yumi on the chat says, I expected the Zelda version to be much more expensive, honestly. Me too. I'm right there with you. I thought the Zelda skin version would be much more expensive, but if you're getting an OLED version and you want to spend $10 more to get a fancy Zelda version, by all means, if it's available, get it. Like, now, I guess the argument D-Brand is going to make is if you already own the OLED version that's not the Zelda version, then get the D-Brand skin, or just live without, which is always an option too. Moving on to the next story, PlayStation's back Deviant Games has been hit with layoffs. The studio is currently working on an original IP that would be published by Sony. More and more I see these stories, the more and more I wonder if PlayStation is going to really not have much of a lineup in 3 or 4 years, which I don't know if there's even going to be a PlayStation 6 if that's the direction they go. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Sony gives up on consoles in general and just goes for maybe a streaming idea. Like, if they were to do what the Sony movie division does, they would take their license of games that they own, their originals or second party games, and then they would try to license those games to other companies, which would be mostly either PC or Xbox or Switch, and then they would just pull out of the hardware business altogether. But it would be kind of crazy for Sony PlayStation to do that after fighting against Xbox that much. I bet Sony would love if somebody like Amazon.com made a console instead of them, and they could just license to a different company that they didn't have this existing animosity to. But it really is feeling like PlayStation is going to stay in existence out of spite, or unless the leadership changes or something weird happens there. And inherently, the PlayStation really can't not make a PlayStation 6 or can't stop making consoles because there's just so much demand for them, which then just circles back to this story as either they are going to have to do a lot more contracts and deals with other companies to make up for all the layoffs and deals that aren't happening with their existing second party companies, or they're going to be selling a lot of hardware with very few games, which has always been kind of the problem with the PlayStation, in my opinion, is that it feels like there's a better sales pitch to make you at least feel like there's a lot more Xbox games that are playable compared to PlayStation games. I don't even really think it's that true, but in my mind it always feels like the Xbox Game Pass Ultimate and all of that implies you're getting a lot more games, or just gives you a lot more games, even if they're not particularly great games. And inherently that has been the problem that's revealing itself now with Xbox, is that they have too many bad games coming out to the point where people are starting to notice, where they've gotten away with putting out mediocre and bad games for quite a while. We don't have any real numbers here, really just some tweets once again. Feels like there should be more official requirements to put out press releases when there's a layoff, or put layoffs in a database somewhere that news sites could scrape at all times. Just to have like a government database to name and shame people who are laying off would be great, and frankly it would be a pretty great place to kind of synergize where to look for people to hire and to manage any kind of unemployment and things like that. Of course, a database that could be scraped by the public would also be a database of people that potentially would be vulnerable to scams. It's shocking how many people get scammed by job employment scams, either in the case that they get actual jobs, but the jobs are underpaying or way different than what they claimed they were going to be, or there's just some other scam around that, where you don't ever get a job, or they try to get money out of unemployed people who are desperate. Moving on, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom players are already building ridiculous contraptions. Players put Nintendo's creation tool to the test. Honestly, I feel like this is probably a stretch by Video Games Chronicles to put out another article around Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. That being said, it does seem like they were able to back it up with several tweets of people building ridiculous things. And what's funny about this, for me, and it still puts me in a weird position where I'm probably not the best person to play Tears of the Kingdom, is I really have no interest in making any of these contraptions at all. So if I were to play Tears of the Kingdom and half of the game is engaging with this Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts type mechanic, and I don't engage with it, then that would be awkward, certainly. And I definitely do have a concern that this battery icon here may just be the new stamina bar in Tears of the Kingdom, where you're just constantly having to try to find ways to increase your battery power to build contraptions. I wouldn't be surprised if you start with Tears of the Kingdom with fairly large amounts of health and things like that. And those systems that were so drastically changed in Breath of the Wild don't seem like they're being drastically changed back, even with traditional temples. I imagine you don't have to do a traditional temple to get a full heart to upgrade your health. I imagine it is just whatever armor you're wearing gives you your hearts, or whatever food, spells, potions you take gives you more hearts. Let's see. Tears of the Kingdom is by far the UK's biggest boxed launch of 2023. So 2 Tears of the Kingdom articles back to back. Nope, 3 Tears of the Kingdom back to back. A Zelda producer says he's, quote, for sure interested in a Zelda movie or TV show, which why in the world would you say you aren't interested in that? That would be kind of ridiculous to say you weren't. That being said, Zelda is a more silent protagonist than even Mario is, so like, well, Zelda isn't, Link is. Um, Link basically never says anything at all in any of the games. Uh, so giving him any kind of personality other than just being the hero trying to save the princess would be difficult and feel a little off canon. Um, you'd almost have to write in a romance backstory, which pushes it probably to not be a kid's movie or TV show so much as maybe a preteen or a teenager or even teenager story. Um, and yeah, you could definitely make a generic fantasy movie or TV show and call a character Zelda. It's just going to be very, very difficult to make that character feel like Zelda. And you can't lean heavily on any of the narrative stories in any of the Zelda games because it's always just Ganon shows up, he's a bad guy, Zelda, the princess, needs help, and Link is the adventurer, and then you run around a bunch of places. And some things happen, yes, but not that much. The weirdest movie, the one with the best story, would probably be the weirder Zelda games, like Majora's Mask. And I doubt that would work very well either. It would probably make a lot of sense to not even make it animated, since Zelda is more action focused, slightly more action focused than a Mario game, particularly Breath of the Wild, where you're hang gliding and swinging swords. It would make a lot more sense to have a live action Zelda, but then that would probably feel very like poorly designed unless you put a lot of money into it. So then you're probably back to 3D CGI. But yeah, this is much ado about nothing, really. Yes, Nintendo would love to have more movies and TV shows made, and they are going to make more movies and TV shows. Or more movies at least. Maybe they won't make TV shows. It is, I think, worth pointing out, though, that the Nintendo Land in Japan made a Mario theme park, and then they added a Donkey Kong theme park to it. So that points to what Nintendo is thinking as the most popular. So we're more likely to get a Donkey Kong movie next than we would a Zelda movie. Zelda might be the third, fourth, or fifth movie in a series of Nintendo movies, which might take them a very long time to get to. In all fairness, though, they will make a Zelda movie or TV show way faster than they would make a Metroid movie or TV show. Whereas, yeah, you could probably make a horror, like Aliens type movie around Metroid pretty easily, but Nintendo just doesn't care about Metroid, so they wouldn't do it. Let's see. The Tears of the Kingdom Collector's Edition is back in stock at Amazon UK, if you're a UK person. Special Pro controller is also back in stock. Xbox Series X and S reached 2 million sales in the UK quicker than the Switch did. It's still only the 8th fastest console to reach the milestone, though. Which, do they have a list here of what the 7 were above that? No, they don't. Which that would have been the tease to useful information that they're not fulfilling. So, yeah. If anything, that probably speaks to the Switch not selling particularly well in the UK. Which, yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense too. Super Mario Brothers movie will be released digitally this week in the United States. Fans can buy it or rent it starting May 16th. So tomorrow. It'll be available exclusively on digital platforms where customers can buy or rent movies from Universal Pictures Home Entertainment. It will cost $30 to purchase it. What does it cost to rent it? $30 to digitally own something is quite the price. But I could see a lot of parents pulling the trigger on that just because their kids love the Mario movie, or for some reason they didn't see the Mario movie so far. Almost certainly, though, if you've got to get it from Universal Pictures Home Entertainment, then you're probably limited to something like Hulu or Amazon Prime or a on-demand service on cable packages and cable boxes. Physical discs don't seem to be coming out anytime soon, which would make a lot of sense for them to come out in this case in particular. But yeah, so you're probably not going to get a cheap Blu-ray rental or anything like that from Redbox anytime soon. We've already talked about the European Commission clearing Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Nobody ever says Activision Blizzard King. We already talked about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodhunt ending development. And we already talked about Amazon making a Lord of the Rings MMO for PC and consoles, although we are getting new information here that it is PCs and consoles. And I see a third Middle Earth logo of some sort here. Middle Earth Enterprises was acquired last year, giving it worldwide rights to motion pictures, video games, board games, and merchandising, theme parks, stage productions relating to Lord of the Rings trilogy and The Hobbit, which arguably was the exact things that the Amazon Prime Video did not have when they tried to make the Rings of Power series, which people did not like. Although I think they didn't like it for several reasons. And I guess that's notably why Amazon Prime Video is not being mentioned in this deal. And we already talked about the UK regulators coming out and saying the EU was wrong for approving the Microsoft Activision deal. Which at a certain point, I think the EU is probably going to make some arbitrary decisions that don't really matter to them just to piss off the UK. The EU in particular is very happy to see the UK fail and falter in every way possible after the Brexit happened, because they don't want other countries to also leave the EU. Which in retrospect, with Russia invading Ukraine, had the EU formed like a standing army and had the UK still involved in that, and the EU decided to defend Ukraine, it would have probably caused the beginnings of a World War III, certainly, but it may not have changed too much, really. Or it may have just proven the argument that the EU should have a more unified military support. It's kind of funny, like, the EU itself was created more as a way of combining your efforts economically, and really doesn't even do a great job of doing that, when it would make a lot more sense to go back and do a more traditional group of treaties and have your military might combined under the same principles, first and foremost, and then do economics later. Moving on, back to video games. The CD Projekt makes layoffs after rescoping the Witcher spin-off game. We talked about this before. And then Tears of the Kingdom nears 500,000 physical sales in France. Reportedly topped the launch of FIFA 23, which was last year's best-selling game. So that's the last Video Games Chronicle article for today, and nearly half of them were Zelda stories. So let's go through the Gematsu articles, which aren't that many of them, and perhaps that's just because Gematsu has more journalistic integrity and won't just try to make articles when there are none. In fact, in praise of Gematsu, I don't think I've ever seen them make an article that didn't have a reason for existing. Now, they are pretty bad about putting out every single press release they get from every single company, so you very often will see the same game advertised week after week after week, but they only put out one story based on each press release, which usually means the game is talking about a new character or they put out a new trailer. I've never seen repetition of talking about the same thing multiple times, or very similar things, or Gematsu stretching to make an article around something that doesn't matter. But Gematsu is also very good about just talking about video games and the release date, so 99% of all their articles are just, this game is coming out for these consoles at this time, or this game is coming out for these consoles and we don't know a time. Not so true in this story, in that Hogwarts Legacy for Switch is delayed to November 14th. Tekken 8, here's an example of a press release, has the Hoa Arang gameplay trailer. I probably didn't pronounce that correctly. I did see more of the Street Fighter open world gameplay mechanic. It seems like you walk around a city street and then you will walk up to a certain person and decide to fight them. So it's just a bunch of potential people that you're going to fight in the open world gameplay mechanic, that with a 3D environment to initiate the fight, and then it jumps to the 2D 2.5D fighting mechanic. The Atelier Ryza Ever Darkness and the Secret Hideout anime begins airing July 1st. I assume that this is the anime based on the first game to start with, if not going through the entire Atelier series. Noticeably, these characters that are being shown here in the background don't even feel like the same characters that you would have seen in the most recent game. Let's see if we can do a little bit of research here. Which one to click on? Let's click on this one and see if this works. It probably won't. Nope. Well, last time all I can say there is last time I saw the Atelier characters, it seemed like it was a slightly different group than is in the anime, but that's not super surprising. That the beginning of a story you would have a smaller group, and then over the course of 3 games you would add more characters. That's pretty traditional JRPG gameplay mechanics and story mechanics. Moving on, Genshin Impact version 3.7 update Duel the Summoners Summit launches May 24th. So you've got some Genshin Impact updates here. Apparently they are introducing an entire collectible card game gameplay mechanic into Genshin Impact, which is definitely feels like it's a distraction from what the RPG game actually is. Perhaps this is the beginning of some desperation on the part of Genshin Impact. Although, in all fairness, Gwent was added into The Witcher 3 at the very beginning. I could see a little bit of desperation to do something different in Genshin Impact because you have Hoyoverse releasing their new sci-fi mobile game too, so they probably are cannibalizing their own sales with their new game, and so doing something different on their old game might bring some people back who tried the new sci-fi game. Inherently though, since Genshin Impact is a gacha game where you're trying to collect as many characters as possible, you would want to add new characters, not a collectible card game mechanic. It definitely feels like to me that Genshin Impact is something that is just far too beyond me. I really would have had to get into it when it first launched, not at 3.7 version. And I guess maybe if they got rid of a lot of the microtransaction and the gacha game mechanics, maybe they could resell Genshin Impact as a console game fairly easily at this point. Particularly if they decide to wrap up the story, if there is that much of a story, and make it an entire experience. They're probably making too much money though to wrap up the story, so it's just going to forever be outside of the reach of any new players. It makes no sense to start playing Genshin Impact now, even with the collectible card game mechanic. If the collectible card game became very popular, they'd just spin it off as its own thing. Moving on, a retro-inspired Metroidvania game called Hayaku and the Island of Darkness has been announced for PC. Huge maps, 12 weapons, armor customization, and more. Looking at the animation, it feels very much like an NES game. Really, maybe a Super NES game, which is definitely not the types of games or types of visuals I'm looking for. You can even see in the trailer, which I guess trailers are just playing now. Whatever was stopping them is no longer working. But you can see in the trailer, the animation for the trailer is way far off from what the actual gameplay looks like. The Last Labyrinth Lucidity Lost for Switch launches on May 24th. This is the non-virtual reality version of Last Labyrinth. So, yeah. And Last Labyrinth as a game, I don't know if this is really a game that needs to be re-released at all, or if this isn't more of a case where they're just trying to get a few more sales for a game that nobody really ever played because it was locked behind VR mostly. A game called Border Break for the PS4 is ending service on September 9th. It was a high-speed robot team battle game shutting down after 5 years. And yeah, I've never even heard about it, but apparently it was a Sega game, so can't really complain about Sega shutting down a game I've never heard of though. A game called Cosmo Machina acquires the rights to Triggerheart Excelia. The shoot 'em up game first launched in 2006. I guess Cosmo Machia is probably a company, not a game. Yeah. It's a vertical shoot 'em up game. Which I assume means it will get a re-release at the very least, if not a remake. The side-scrolling run-and-gun game Blackfinger Jet has been announced for PC. Let's see what it looks like on Steam. Pixely concept art. Let's see. If anything, I probably shouldn't make a YouTube short around something that is this early production, but yeah, I'm not really even going to try and draw a line in the sand there. I'm just going to say anything that announces is going to get a YouTube short going forward. Once it has a release date, it may get another YouTube short. Once it's released, it may even get a third YouTube short, depending if it just comes across my eyes again. The game WrestleQuest has been delayed to summer, no longer due out in May. This was a game that looked potentially interesting in its silliness, in that it's taking some iconic 80s and 90s looking wrestlers and making a party-based RPG around it. A free-to-play mech first-person shooter called Hawken Reborn has been announced for PC. It's probably not my type of game, but you know, there aren't that many mech games out there in the first place. Usually you just see a mech sequence at best in games, and that's usually the best way to implement it too, because if you're in a mech, you're going to be very close to being on a rail anyway, so you just have this sequence of a lot of destruction, on rail shooting in most cases. We already talked about Vampire the Masquerade, Bloodhunt ending development, servers to remain live. And then we already talked about the European Commission approving Microsoft's Activision Blizzard merger. Smurfs Kart is coming to the PS5, PS4, Xbox Series, Xbox One, and PC on August 22nd. It's currently only available for the Switch, so coming to other consoles. I guess one of the things to keep an eye out for is it has been fairly consistent a problem that these kids-focused racing games have just a ton of microtransactions or DLC around them. If the Smurf game avoids that, it easily could be one of the top contenders of the game company of the racing games to be a Mario Kart competitor on PC, since Mario Kart is itself never going to come to PC. And inherently that's part of Nintendo's problem here, is that if Nintendo did put out just Mario Kart on PC, or other consoles and PC, they would be the de facto kid-focused racing game, and they would just monopolize the market more than they already do. Same is kind of true with like Splatoon, because there really isn't any real competitor for a kid-friendly like team shooter like Splatoon, which Splatoon does a little bit more than that. And there's another genre I was thinking of that Nintendo could also totally dominate on in Smash Brothers. Yes, if they brought Smash Brothers to PC, then they would dominate in the fighting game industry pretty well. Like, you'd still see Tekken and Street Fighter, but you might see several Smash Brothers attempts and clones go away. Or at the very least, they would dominate in Smash Brothers type games, if not fighting games overall. Layers of Fear launches June 15th, according to Komatsu. And then we already talked about Amazon Games announcing the Lord of the Rings MMO for console and PC. Which then that puts us in our fall list cleanup. These are old games that were put on the fall list that I want to decide whether to put it on the wish list, which means they're good enough to buy, or get rid of because they don't meet certain criteria. Fairy Deer, unfortunately, is right on the cusp of this criteria, so I'm going to just leave it. Well, actually, I can make a decision here. It says it's a kinetic visual novel, which means there are no branching story decisions. It's just beginning, middle, and end. As a visual novel, price isn't terrible, but I really don't want to play a visual novel that doesn't have any kind of gameplay mechanic to it. So I'm going to say no to that. Failure Drill came out on March 11th, so it needs more time to meet the requirements of having at least 30 reviews, or having been out for a long enough amount of time that it's not likely to get 30 reviews, which Fading Light Anti-World I think falls under that category. A VR game that has 2 reviews from the October of 2022, so we'll get rid of that. Faded Stories Greenberg. This is over 30 reviews and they are mostly positive, which is another requirement. Do I want to say yes to this? Seems like the idea here is that the whole world is fading away. So is it a game you have to speed run as an adventure game, or what? I really need to understand how you'd play this. Play the abstract point and click and experience the amazing atmosphere of the place. The game is divided into a series of short stories where each chapter has its unique theme, 5 alternate paths, and discover as many secrets as possible. So this is like a really small puzzle thing. I think in part of the Bad Dream series, or from the same developer. So $6.99. If I click on a bundle here, you have Bad Dream Stories for discount for $1.99 or $1.19. Darkness Under My Bed, Faded Stories Greenberg. Okay, I see what the general idea here is. Okay. So I guess that's just close enough to say yes to it, but in all honesty, it would have to be fairly discounted to say yes to this game. That's very much on the cusp of saying no to it. Then we have a game called Faded Memories Video Game Edition, which seems like it's a completely different company using the phrase Faded Memories, which that's not super surprising. And it does not meet the requirements, and it's not reviewed very well or by very many people. Face Value is from February. Seems to be kind of a dice game. I'll give it more time. Fablelands. Looks like it's a turn-based RPG game that's very positive at 80%. So we'll put that on the wish list. Just checking to make sure it's not still in early access, because I don't want things on the wish list that aren't early access. F1 2023 needs more time. Hasn't come out yet. Whereas F1 2022 is incredibly poorly received with mixed reviews, so it can go off the fall list. Eye of the Owl Blush VR is a VR game, which I think I would still leave this on the fall list, even though I am leaning towards giving up on VR only games, since it's highly unlikely I'd ever get a VR headset. Then our last game on the fall list we have is Exeus the Complete Collection, which obviously isn't relevant enough because it has only 3 user reviews. So that brings us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. Steam bans gambling with new conduct changes. I feel like Game Developer is probably exaggerating a little bit here. They're basically saying in the point of the code of conduct that you can't post links to or things in the forum as far as Steam gambling. The idea of going to a Steam skin gambling site or trading site that is completely separate from Steam, and then using the Steam API and the Steam Marketplace to gamble Steam skins or trade Steam skins, doesn't seem like that has been changed at all. They are simply putting a new code of conduct as far as just promoting gambling in the forum, which I guess inherently means that if you do have a Steam skin gambling or trading site, you're going to have to just find some other way to advertise it instead of putting those advertisements in a Steam forum, which I don't think I've seen a lot of that, but also almost all the Steam skin trading and gambling happens on Counter-Strike Go, and I don't look at the forums or play Counter-Strike Go. We already talked about Atari acquiring System Shock remake developer Night Dive for up to $19.5 million. There is perhaps some concern there that Night Dive won't do any of the other projects that they possibly would have done, but because they're acquired by Atari. But they might actually do more projects too. We'll just have to wait and see. The PlayStation-backed Deviation Games makes major layoffs. The job cuts were made just 8 months after the sudden departure of the Deviation co-founder Jason Blundell. So once again, we have stories of major layoffs. Tears of the Kingdom develops hope to deliver an Eternal Sunshine. I guess that's Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind movie moment. Blessed are the Forgetful, which I guess that might be a spoiler somewhat to what the story actually is in Tears of the Kingdom. Microsoft's proposed Activision Blizzard merger gets the EU approval. We talked about that. Amazon Games and Bracer team on a Lord of the Rings MMO. Almost certainly a Lord of the Rings MMO you're not going to be able to play as any of the named characters in the Lord of the Rings books. You're going to end up playing as just some random hobbit or wizard or archer. You may not even be able to play as wizards, frankly. It's going to be hard to balance the abilities of a hobbit to the abilities of an elf to the abilities of a human. Then we also talked about the CMA decrying EU's approval. So the UK, Yumi on the chat says, "Hey, gonna have to go to sleep. I like your stream. Hope to join earlier and for a longer time next. Well, thanks for chatting, Yumi, and watching as much as you can. I know people's time zones are different, and I know I start way too late. My insomnia causes me to start way too late myself. So have a good sleep, and thanks for watching. You can always come back later and watch more, or watch any of my pre-recorded footage, or watch a different live stream when that happens. Lots of options. Thanks for watching, though. Let's see. And then our last GameDeveloper.com article is that CD Projekt Red lays off Molasses Flood developers after changes to the Witcher spinoff. Which then that brings us to the new games on Steam. Let's double check our blur is enabled, because we'll run into adult games. It does occur to me on basically a weekly basis. This game still might be something that when we cover the adult games, I focus on the adult games a lot more and talk about them. And they are somewhat of an albatross around the neck of all the other games. That being said, it's basically just censorship. If I don't cover the adult games, and the adult games just have to have more description verbally around them because I have to blur the visuals, whereas I can just click through all the screenshots here on Orb Flight, for example, and you generally get an idea that it's a game where you're going to fly around and collect orbs. I don't think there is anything much more to it. And in general, there is just way more games like this that aren't adult games, where it is just standard garbage. Like an RPG Maker game here looks fine, but everybody, I'm exaggerating certainly if I said everybody hates RPG Maker's games, but enough people hate them that it doesn't even make a lot of sense visually to make a YouTube short around an RPG Maker game. So I'm just going to say no to it, since I'm not going to play an RPG Maker game either. Whereas Xenosys here might have something to it. In general, I make very little decisions here, and I'm just trying to make a very judge a book by the cover idea decision as to whether I should put it on the fall list or whether I should make a YouTube short on it, and or whether I should make a YouTube short on it. I think I can say no to this one, which means I probably say no to this one, although I kind of like the look of this one, so I'm going to give it a chance. Something like People Jumping Tower here is maybe a gimmick that if it had more visual polish to it, as far as just even background, I might say yes to this or think about it more. But the fact that it's just the exact same screenshot as far as the background and the grass highlights a lack of effort. Across the Void looks like a visual mess. Superflurious Returns looks like a point and click adventure game. Is there another game by this developer? I wonder. Nope, on Steam. Okay, so here we have an adult game called Operation Save Anna, which looks like it is a first-person shooter asset flip with anime waifu characters and dragons. In fact, in this case, even though this is labeled as an adult game in the adults only section, I think I can safely show every screenshot to show kind of the low effort asset flipping and the terrible UI that this game has and how much of the UI is being taken up. Yeah. Claims to have nudity and sexual content and mature content by the tags. Claims to be early access for $1.39. English, Russian, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. Russian being the second language makes me suspect this is probably a Russian troll game more than anything else. It does say in the actual mature content description, which tends to be a bit more honest, that there are a large number of naked girls, although they're just going to be the asset flipped anime waifu characters, so nothing much to see there. So this is kind of a prime example of a low quality adult game. Let's see. Kong Ming's Fiendish Maze. I think I have to say no just because of this terrible thumbnail. I'm glad we don't have patterns like that where just low effort thumbnails somehow get the algorithm to the Steam algorithm, of which there is very little of algorithm that exists. We are, for the most part, all looking for quality as far as gamers on Steam, where there are definitely little kids that will just click on anything on YouTube, which have messed up the YouTube algorithm beyond the point in which I think it could ever be repaired. So yeah, in a case of this, I'm going to say no, obviously. There are people that get away with medium quality thumbnails and still get sales, but there's very few troll games that I think actually succeed in general, let alone ones that bother to make a low quality thumbnail. Soul Delivery, chapters 1 and 2, looks like it might be something. Inherently, also, I would say you could judge a game by its thumbnails and curate / censor the Steam storefront quite a bit. This next adult game, Office Waifu, is a great example of that, in which it's just a solid color background, very generic thumbnails, fonts, very generic fonts, and then one small picture in the corner. That certainly could be a point to point out to this slide puzzle game with 2D anime girl in provocative nude poses. What's kind of interesting about this is the animation style, this 2D animation style, really feels similar, much more similar to something you would have seen in the 80s or early 90s as far as what anime was back then. A much flatter, less colorful style. It definitely wasn't going for the moe style, which the characters were particularly short and anthropomorphically inaccurate, even smaller eyes to some extent compared to what we see otherwise. That being said, I wouldn't assume that this game is, or these images are actually old images, as much as I would assume that this was drawn either by a Chinese person or a Spanish person or an English person instead of a Japanese person, because those are the languages that are supported. And since Spanish is the second language, I wouldn't be surprised if it was just drawn by somebody in Spanish. Looking at all the thumbnails here, it looks like there's a fairly wide discrepancy in the art styles between the different pictures too, so it's not particularly good quality animation, on top of just being 8 pictures, and that's pretty much it. I think we could probably say a render here can be skipped. It's one of these raft style survival games, but you look at the resource bars and energy bars here and it's very generic, and you look at the screenshots and it's a little low polygon and generic. So this almost would be a game that would have to come out of early access and be significantly improved to catch my attention. Let's see, we have a game called Divided Skies, which I kind of want to give it a chance because of this thumbnail, but it doesn't look amazingly great. So I'll put it on the follow list, but I won't make a YouTube short around it because visually its thumbnails aren't that good. Tap Shap, a multi-platform reaction game. Doesn't look like anything. Quester looks like a old NES game, or honestly even pre-NES game, first generation type game. English is not supported, Japanese only, so that solves that problem for me. I wouldn't be surprised if actually this is something like a PC Engine or Commodore 64 game that they are re-releasing for Japanese fans that have nostalgia for this game that almost certainly never came out to the West. If this was a PC Engine game, though, the art and the thumbnails must have been improved, and it because the thumbnails and the character designs definitely wouldn't have worked on those kinds of consoles or those kinds of PCs. But yeah, we'll leave it at that. Can't put it on the follow list. Can't really do much of anything. This is a VR game, a full motion rotoscoped VR game. You seem to be just rowing magically through the streets of a Nazi occupied city. So basically this is a sit and watch this person in part react to what he's seeing, and turn your head and watch what other people are, watch the other people. It doesn't feel like it's very good quality here as far as the rotoscoping or even the concept. Like at a certain point, why not just sit? Maybe they didn't want a sci-fi element, so they go with the boat, but why not go with a magical element instead? And see, if they wanted to tell an important story to tell, it's an unfair claim to force them to say it should be free, but it kind of feels like it should be free, particularly if it's VR. Asking people to pay $5 to be bummed out. Yeah, for what is a VR artistic experience. A bum out VR artistic experience is asking a little much for me, in my opinion. Path to Warband looks like yet another collectible card game. We'll make a short around that. Bouncy Motors just looks like kind of nothing. Spaceship Survivors. This is obviously one of those Survivors clones, but the visuals on it look a little bit more polished than a lot. Here we have Crimson Song, a Yuri visual novel, not in the adult section. Yuri being the Japanese word for girl on girl romance, although in this case it's vampire girl on girl. I wouldn't be surprised if this game doesn't actually support Japanese, because this doesn't really look like a Japanese animator. Nope, it's English, Portuguese, Brazil, simplified Chinese, then Japanese at the bottom, which would make me suspect it was a Brazilian animator. Once again, this is a kinetic story, and I think I am going to be more critical on kinetic stories going forward and just say I don't have any interest in them. Does that mean I should not make a YouTube short? Probably still should make YouTube shorts though on them, because there will be people out there that do like kinetic visual novels. Glypha looks like a Joust clone, which in all fairness, a Joust clone wouldn't be the terrible worst things. But do I want to play a Joust clone? I'll make a YouTube short on it, but I'm not going to put it on the follow list. That's just not the type of game I want to play. Old arcade games are just so different from what they once were. That they're just not really recognizable as video games. And then we have this HoloLive room visitor thing. Fan-made game allowing players to visit the 3D background rooms environments used in HoloLive 3D Studio 3D streams. Well, that definitely doesn't feel like a game, so I'm gonna say no. Tiny Elf here is obviously just a garbage asset flip game. Kidney Stone Clicker, while a funny gimmick, is probably not anything anybody would really want to play, particularly if you did have kidney stones. Super Patrioto Simulator sounds like it doesn't even support English, except it's only Portuguese Brazil, and it looks like garbage. Seeing some Portuguese games all released recently. Does this support English? English and Polish. This is a visual novel, and I would say there's not anything amazing here that looks great. If anything, I feel like the visuals have to just be absolutely perfect in a visual novel, because that's really all you're getting there. And so these look good, but there's nothing wrong with these visuals. They just don't look great, and there's a little bit too much bloom and lack of detail in the background. So I'm gonna say no to that. Missile Collector Man looks like nothing. Spiriters Hope's Blooming Dawn looks like another RPG maker, so no to that. I guess I am saying no to RPG maker games as far as making YouTube shorts around them. There's just too many of them. The field is flooded. It's not particularly fair, but it really is the case that there's too many RPG maker games and they all just look the same, so they're not visually appealing. I'll give this Trail of Asha a chance. Thereafter, I think the answer to this is no, because this looks like a Stray clone doing it a lot worse. Here we have a German game, which maybe there would be something interesting here if it supported English, but it doesn't. Bee Hunter Puzzle DX. As far as Vampire Hunters, there might be something to that. How many games do we have left? Not that many. That being said, I don't think I will get back to playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Today. I'll probably just play some off screen if I do anything like that. Robo Dunk as a basketball game. There might be something to that idea. I say that a lot, certainly. Like, I'm willing to give a lot of things a chance at the beginning before immediately rejecting it, but I can't be super hyped about games. Is Cook Serve Forever, which I feel like this had been teased before. It seems like it's a weird combination of cooking mini games and weird looking characters, which maybe there's some story there. Cooking adventure game, that's what they're saying. You've got some good looking food in the middle, but then you've got a very bright and colorful distracting screens otherwise. Always it feels like you are just pressing QuickTime events, which probably means it is something kind of like a WarioWare game, which that could work certainly. Clicks of Courage doesn't look like anything. A Mass Effect BioWare EA game, Mass Effect 2 2010 edition, is being released back on Steam. Interesting. Which, there's a different version of this too, where I don't know why you wouldn't buy the Legendary Edition, which includes the single player based content for and 40 DLC content for from Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, including promo weapons, armors, and packs remastered and optimized for 4K UHD. So, there's no reviews on this game. Let's go see what the Legendary Edition is reviewed as. Mostly positive. So, very confusing as to why they would release the old version of the game. Sorry, I'll turn the blur off. Other than perhaps there's just some people somewhere that have a reason for this. Just appeared in my library, hope worth all no money I spent on it. Product received for free. So, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if they are just giving this version to everybody who already owns Mass Effect. Or the Legendary Edition. Hopefully that doesn't mean that the Legendary Edition, which seems to be fairly well received, is going to somehow disappear or get taken down. But who knows? Toon Racing is an interesting thought, but I think we can say no, in particular because it looks like there's only 4 tracks. Live art. Seems like you draw things but also avoid obstacles while drawing things. Yeah, I don't think there's really a game there. Flashing lights, police, firefighting, emergency services simulator, which is an interesting question. Should there be one game for multiple emergency services, or should it be separated for people who want to play as cops versus firefighters versus EMTs? I think it probably should be separated as 3 games. That being said, this is rated very positively now, and so I'll put it on the follow list and make a YouTube short around it. And then think about it some more. Demon Scrolls doesn't look like anything of interest. Forever Pool VR is out. I guess I'll make a YouTube short around that. The Backrooms Deeper, yet another Backrooms asset flip game. I feel like this internet meme of the Backrooms is evolving, at least in video game formats, but this really could just be the same person selling the exact same game over and over again. But as you look here, They're just starting to see like more and more get added from what was originally just this generic, almost office backroom concept to now there's just a whole collection of weird environments hiding a second reality. I wish Control had, as a real game, had dealt with that idea a little bit more, and they probably will in a sequel. And in all fairness, they did put out like a new patch in Control to better work with high dynamic range visuals. So we could very easily see a sequel of Control that is a bit less dark and a little bit more colorful, and that could certainly be one thing to improve Control. Although my main complaint about Control is just the repetitive enemies and fighting. If you took out all the enemies in Control, or most of the enemies, and only had a few boss fights, and mostly just had a almost horror walking around an empty office solving little puzzle event type game, I think that probably would have worked a little bit better. You could have made Control a little bit shorter too, because it gets a little long and stretched out. Like, clearly what they're interested in Control is telling interesting stories, so the fighting mechanics and enemies, I really got in the way of that. And the office in the first building as a concept, where all the levels were, was too big, and that's how I missed an entire section in the game and didn't really care to go back and find it. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this stream then. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to further follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and give me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.